All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Hannah. I'm the Assistant Director here at the Billings Public Library, and we're so excited to have Melissa with us today. Melissa is a rising star, in my opinion, especially in the area of biographies. She's going to talk to us today about her book, about living in the Alaskan frontier, and I, for one, am very excited to hear about it. I would love to see Alaska, so the little tastes I can get from authors like Melissa, I really look forward to. So again, thank you very much for coming. If we could, give a warm Billings welcome to Melissa Cook.
And we did live in Bush, Alaska for 2 years, depending on the term of how you define Bush, Alaska. Some people would say it was 20 years because we lived on Prince of Wales Island for 18 years, and it does have a ferry, so some people are very technical and you can't have a ferry or a road. There's no road to Prince of Wales Island, but there is a ferry, but it took us about an hour and a half to get there one way on a really rough shot rock road. So people who live there do think they live in the bush. So it just depends on how you define it. So this is my husband, Elgin Cook, and he's going to be running the slides and filling in for me when I don't get everything in there that I need to get. So this is Alaska. Alaska is so large that if you look at it across the United States, you can see that it is the largest state in the nation, but even if you cut it in half, it would still be the largest state in the nation. So I'm on a lot of the blogs on Facebook offering advice to people who want to come to Alaska or move to Alaska. And they just say, I want to go to Alaska. Well, do you want to go to Florida, Alaska, or do you want to go to North Dakota, Alaska? There's a big difference. Do you want to go to the larger cities, or do you want to go to a bush community? And that is very different lifestyle between those. Do you want to turn the slide for me? When you think of a population map and you see red, you think of a lot of people. I know I do. When I see red, I think that's going to be a lot of people, but when there's red on this map of Alaska, it means 5 people per square mile. 5. To give you an idea, Billings is 2,500 people per square mile. The city of Detroit, where I grew up, is 4,800 per square mile. It was even more when I was growing up. And the state of Wyoming is 2.3 people per square mile. The state of Alaska's average is 1.28 people per square mile. Not a lot of people out there. But I do want to point out we have somebody who was from the Aleutians. I hope you don't mind if I point that out. But this lady over here in the red up front, she lived in the Aleutians. And she's the only one I've ever met that has lived in the Aleutians. Okay. When we first got our job, the book begins with our job search to the job fair. Once we got our job, we had to get to Alaska, and there was no internet at the time, and people didn't say, okay, this is how you get there. So we got out a map, and we took this road 47 hours from Burlington all the way up through Canada, up through the Yukon. Most beautiful fall colors that they had up there at that time. They had the greens and the blue water from the glaciers. Gorgeous. If you're going to see the Yukon Territory, August is the best month, in my opinion. I've never seen it except in May, and that was ice and snow. When we came back down the next year, we camped in the Yukon in the ice and snow, and we couldn't see the colors, so August was much better. So we got to Anchorage, and then we went out to Homer, and then we flew in a single-engine plane all the way down the Aleutians, the Alaska Peninsula to the Aleutians. That was a 2.5-hour flight. When we got to Homer, we thought we moved to the great Yellowstone Park of the North, and the smile was as wide as could be, and our face hurt. We were so happy. And then we got on the plane, and we flew out to Nelson Lagoon, and I thought about, while we were flying, that we had been to a presentation much like this during the job fair, and a man who was hiring for the North Slope, which is the northern part of the state, took out a black marker on a white piece of paper. He made a black mark on the paper. He held it up, and he asked us all to confirm, yes, that we saw that we understood the white represented snow, and the black represented the community, and the community was small. And therefore, if we were hired by them for a job, we better get off that plane. Who would get a job and not get off the plane? Well, The pilot, George Nathan, who I researched and found 25 years later to get his side of the story, but George hollers from the front of the plane, "Nelson Lagoon up ahead." I look out the window and I see the Bering Sea, and I look out and I see the the lagoon, and I don't see the village of Nelson Lagoon. So I holler out and I scream, "Where?" And he tips the plane so we can see Nelson Lagoon. And one of our slides up here are going to show you what Nelson Lagoon looks from the air. Okay, go ahead. After we lived in Nelson Lagoon, we moved to Prince of Wales Island. We spent 2 years in Nelson Lagoon. This trip was 27 hours, 20 hours less of a drive, but we had 2 ferries to catch, so both ways took 5 hours or 5 full days of travel each way. It was very expensive, but we came home every summer because we needed to come back to our family and friends in order to make it through the long, lonely winters that we were experiencing up there, and that's how we made 20 years. We didn't know very many people that made 20 years in Bush, Alaska. There were very few. So the state of Alaska people will say, "Well, why did you ever go there?" They offered a teacher retirement we couldn't pass up. 20 years and you're done and you get a paycheck. At 49, they started paying me to stay home. How do you pass that up? But the carrot was one that was hard to get for a lot of people. So they would come out, they'd spend a year, 2 years, 5 tops. We saw more teachers go through than we could even remember. I don't remember them. Some of them are writing to me now that they've found my book. And I'm scratching my head, which one was that? I don't remember. There were so many. And when you have a 20-year commitment in a community, in a situation like that where you don't have stores and you don't have regular medical, you can't go to the movies. We thought we were going to watch 20 years of movies when we retired. That's how we appeased ourselves. When we retire, we'll get to see that movie. Well, after 20 years, we have 20 years of movies to do, but we also get to go out and play. I gave everybody a Wyoming Jeepers YouTube channel card. We go out and play. We don't watch movies, so we just didn't get to see 20 years of movies. It's just the way it went. Couldn't buy a pair of shoes out there. 20 years of that gets a little hard for people, so most people don't stay. That's why they could offer a 20-year retirement. And about 2005, the retirement changed because Amazon came along and video conferencing came along. So people weren't so isolated, so that carrot became easier to get. The more people that got it, the harder it was for the state to pay them all. So they changed it. So if you think or know of a teacher that might want to go to Alaska and you think they're going to get my experience, they're not. They're not going to get the Bush type of experience I have because they have internet now, and they're not going to get the retirement because they have the internet now. Okay, next slide. When we went to Prince of Wales Island, we went by ferry. This is the Malsapina Ferry. It holds 500 people and 88 cars. So if you want to get a car on there, you better call early, make sure you make your reservation, especially if you're hauling a trailer, which we were every year. So we made our reservations in March. This ferry was actually taken over by the fishermen in Canada a month before we were set to leave on our trip to Alaska. And the Canadian fishermen were complaining because they felt like the Alaska fishermen were catching too much of the Canadian fish. So they surrounded this ferry and held it captive for 3 days to make their point around the world that the Alaska fishermen were cheating the Canadian fishermen. And maybe they were, I don't know. But we were scheduled to be on that ferry a month later, and they rescheduled the ferry to go through Bellingham for the rest of the year as punishment to their community for doing that, and lost all their tourist revenue. Hurt. The Alaska ferries are all named for glaciers. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see that they have all these different ferries, and they're different sizes and hold different amounts of people and cargo and cars. But let me tell you this. Alaska just got a stipend from the stimulus money. And so the ferry system was actually on its way out. They've already sold the Taku and had it sold for parts. They were going to sell the rest of their ferries. 35 communities depend on these ferries. 80% of the state of Alaska do not live on the road. They either need a bush plane or they need a ferry. So to close the ferry system down is like taking the highways out. And right now, they have stimulus money, so if you ever wanted to go to Alaska and you want to do it in the inexpensive way, now's the time to go. And the cheaper way is to go through Prince Rupert, not Bellingham. It's much cheaper. Okay. Next one. This is the routes. These are the routes that the ferry goes. In fact, Elgin and I, we were going to take the ferry from Homer. If you read my book or have read my book, you'll see that we got to Homer, we were going to take a ferry down to Cold Bay and then take Pen Air flight from Cold Bay to Nelson Lagoon, which was a 45-minute flight. But a big storm rolled in, and the ferry had a repair issue that put us waiting 3 days and an unknown number of days left till the ferry could run. So we took that single-engine plane with George instead. Okay, next. This is the type of plane people think of when they think of bush planes in Alaska. This is a Cub. All right, this is a Cub, right? And I get them confused because there's several different kinds, but this one's the Cub, and I never flew in a Cub. It's a two-seater plane, but it's great for getting into the small little rivers, landing on lakes. They put pontoons on, they can put skis on it and land on ice. And so a lot of people own these planes that live there and fly individually, including Ann Parker, who endorsed my book. She has a plane like this. Okay, next one. This is a Navajo Piper Cub. This is the workhorse of bush Alaska. They land on gravel strips, which makes a difference when you live in Southeast Alaska. They land in the water. These planes land in Nelson Lagoon, and they carry about 9 people, depending on how they situate chairs, because sometimes they take the chairs out and they put in more luggage space, depending on what they're hauling. One of my students that I taught from the time he's a wee little kid all the way through high school, his name is Nathan, and he flies out of Nome now. And I asked him, what is the strangest thing that you ever flew? And he said, a dog sled team. They were all lined up in the just down the aisle, and all the people were in their seats, and the dogs were all down the aisle. He flew in a dog sled team, so go for it, Nathan. Okay. Next plane. This is the Goose, and no. A de Havilland Beaver, sorry. This is the workhorse of the Southeast. I got it confused with the Goose because they have a goose out in south or out in the Aleutians that we used to fly into Acatan. So this is the de Havilland Beaver, and this is the type of plane that I flew in for 18 years, going back and forth from Prince of Wales Island if I didn't take the ferry. I like to take the plane because it was 30 minutes hop from my community to Ketchikan. Whereas if I went by ferry, it was an hour-and-a-half drive to Hollis. You wait an hour there because they'll give your ticket away if you don't show up on time. And then 3-hour ferry ride on to Ketchikan. And then back that night or the next night, and it's a long way. And I'm one of those that likes to run around, want to get off, gotta go do something. So the ferry ride really isn't my favorite. It's his favorite because he doesn't have to drive. Okay, so if you fly in a plane, you have the risk of dying in a plane. And I had somebody on the Facebook pages ask me, is it safe to fly in a plane? Well, yes and no. Do you know how many flights they have? I don't. There are a lot of flights. But the problem happens in the spring and the summer when the tourists come. The pilots that serve our communities aren't enough to serve them too. So they have to bring a bunch of pilots up to serve those that are coming in. And they are not familiar with Southeast Alaska always. Some of them come back year after year, but some are new, and they don't know the area. So you'll notice the statistics here say from 2015 to 2021, was it 15 or 16 people died? 21 people died. And that's just in the Ketchikan area. That's not all of Southeast, that's just Ketchikan. One of the airlines that we used to fly with is called Pac Air or Pacific Air. They lost 3 out of 4 planes in one summer, and some of those planes had multiple people die on them. And they died, we left in 2016 in June. Those accidents started happening in June, July, August, and then Pac Air only had 1 plane left and they closed. It is a risk, but you know, every time you get in the car and you go down the highway, you pass cars going 60, 70, 80 miles an hour heading right for you. and some of you guys don't make it. I'm an EMT in Burlington now, and we just had an accident that had a fatality, and people don't blink an eye. They know that happens. Well, that happens in Bush, Alaska by plane, and so people get all excited. Oh, it was a plane wreck. Well, yeah, but that's our car. Okay. On December 1st, 2021, I had a presentation in Grable, Wyoming, and we decided to get a snapshot of the weather when we were creating this presentation. And you'll notice that there's red around the Aleutians. In this area, it's a typical day out there. It's very windy. To have a wind over 100 miles an hour in the Aleutians is not unusual. I know it's pretty exciting when you get one here, but out there, no. I mean, okay, so we don't really want to go outside, but when it's 35 below in Billings, you don't want to go outside either. The town of Nelson Lagoon was always clean. Everything blew away. So if you want it, you better bring it in. I once asked them at Christmas, I'm from Detroit. They decorate in Detroit. They don't decorate in Nelson Lagoon. So I asked them the first year, why aren't you putting out Christmas lights? Don't you know? Let's take the kids to Anchorage so they can see Christmas lights. And I did take the kids to Anchorage so they could see Christmas lights. They don't have them there either. But in the Aleutians, they don't have them because the wind blows them away, and they thought I was hysterical to suggest putting lights out on their house. But, you know, from Detroit, that's what you do. Go back to the last slide real quick. If you notice in the southeast, it's green. So this is southeast Alaska. It's green, not so windy. In fact, especially on the east side of Prince of Wales Island, we didn't see a lot of wind. It was a nice break. Okay, next one. This is the temperature. When you think of Alaska, you think of cold, snow and ice. But our winters were often warmer than you. I always called my mother-in-law and said, we're, sitting at 20, sitting at 30. People will ask, is it snowy there? We had green grass most of the year, underneath the snow if it snowed. But the temperature would sit between 30 and 32, 34. So some winters, when it was more on the 30 side, we had snowy weather like this year. And other years when it was on the 34 side, we didn't have any snow. And sometimes it fell back and forth and we had a little bit of snow. About 1 in 3 years, snow, 1 in 3 years, rain, 1 in 3 years, mix. We moved to the Ring of Fire. In school, you're taught the Ring of Fire means volcanoes and earthquakes, and you expect that. When you study volcanoes, they teach you Pompeii. They teach you Mount Vesuvius. You see the pictures of the people frozen in time, right? In their last moments of life, they figured they could pour the cement in there and get the picture of the body right down to the detail on their face. So when the volcano, Pavlov volcano, went off in our backyard, and somebody got on the radio and hollered, Pavlov's blowing its top and it's heading our way, the Noé Ardent comes to mind from Mount Vesuvius and all the people, and that's what I thought was about to happen to me. So I ran to the door because I didn't think I had much time, put my hand on that door, and I thought, last second in life, but I'm going to see it. If I'm going to die, I'm going to see it. And when I opened that door with Elgin and the kids all standing beside me, I threw that door open thinking that was it, but I was going to see it. But I saw it, and I'm still here because it all blew the other way. But it blew. Okay. In Alaska, there are 28 different native cultures. And when Russia sent their ships and conquered the coastal lines of Alaska, they required their men to settle within 6 months. They had to have a bride and be married, and they had to expect that they were never going home. That was the expectation when they landed. And they killed a lot of the culture there by refusing to allow their wives to speak the language. They were forced to speak Russian, and their husbands and their male members in their family were forced into slavery. The women were forced into being wives and homemakers, and their culture fairly well, I would say, died there. They don't have the language, at least in our community. Nobody knows the language that they used to speak, and that's why. The Russians conquered the coastal lines of Alaska except one place, and that was Prince of Wales Island. That was where we lived. That place was not conquered, and it wasn't conquered because they were a fierce people, and the fierce people held the best land. The Southeast Alaska land had culture, it had food. You can just go out onto the beach and eat because there's so much food. It's not like the interior where it's a hard life to live. In fact, if you ever want to read a really good book, there's a book written by a lady from the interior. It's called Two Old Women. Two Old Women is the story of two Athabascan, I believe, women who have grown old and are having the pains of old age, the fatigue of old age, and they feel like they've already given their share. The rest of the tribe can carry them, and life at this point for the tribe is difficult, and they leave the women behind to survive, and it's the two women's story. So if you ever want to read a really good one, that's a good one about, and I put it on my, I have MS, and I put it on my MS blog as the book of the month last month, and I put it there because I feel like we all have something to contribute, whether we're disabled, whether we're old, whether we have disabilities of one type or of another, we all have something to give, and their story reminds them of that the hard way. Okay, so that's some of the culture from Alaska.
Why don't you point out Prince of Wales Island and
Okay.
Nelson Lagoon?
Okay, so this is the Tlingit and Haida people and Southeast Alaska. This is where we lived on Prince of Wales Island. Third largest island in the state. The only other islands in the country that are larger are Kodiak and Hawaii. Third largest island in the country, I mean. And then Nelson Lagoon is over here. One thing about Prince of Wales Island, in particular Thorn Bay where we lived, that was the largest logging community in the world with 1,500 people, record size. And you can see the little pinpoints here. Thorn Bay, Nelson Lagoon. Now we're going to get to see that ring of fire here in the next picture. These are the volcanoes on the Aleutian Chain, all the white-tipped mountains. And they're active. By the way, Pavlov volcano is the most active volcano in the world. It's gone off, I believe, twice since we left. Nobody warned us, though. Why would you not warn people that that might happen? Okay, next. And that it won't kill you.
What's on the left and right?
Okay, so there's Bering Sea on the right, and if you see the little green pin at the top, that's Nelson Lagoon, and that is the Gulf of Alaska and the Pacific Ocean on the left. Do you remember when George tipped the wing and let us see where Nelson Lagoon was? Because I couldn't see it anywhere. That's what I saw. It's 50 to 100 yards wide. It's 1 mile of beach down to the airstrip that you can see straight up above my finger here, and it's 1 mile down the beach to the dump. That's all the road, and if you took all the roads inside, you can maybe get another mile. Everybody has four-wheel drive out there because the sand will sink you. You have to be able to get out, so there are no cars there. There's really not very many cars on Prince of Wales either. Shallow. You can tell that the waters are very shallow because it's green. 80 feet deep is about the average depth of the Bering Sea. So they get really big tides and the waves crash in. There was a house there when we first got there. We couldn't figure out why they had built a barricade around their home and taken out their view. Why would you do that? Then, at the end of my first month, he left to go on an administrator meeting in another town, and I was left with the kids to face the worst storm that we ever saw out there. Of course, he didn't know that was going to happen. But we ended up sitting in a Suburban out on the highest elevation that I could find, which was 10 feet. And we watched the storm come in during high tide when we were already barely made us an island during high tide already. And we barely had 10 feet of elevation at the widest of 100 yards wide. And the tide came running down the roads, and the waves hit that house. They hit the wall first, and then they splashed up and rained down on the house. And then I knew why they had that barricade. Okay.
You probably want to point out that everything there is black sand.
Yes.
And it's black sand from volcanoes. This whole string of volcanoes going down the Aleutian Chain, there's sand everywhere.
This is the black sand. I'll send it around so you can see it. And by the way, black sand has some kind of magnetic something or other in it, and it kills bugs. So we tried to do an ant farm for the kids. They all died. The kids had never seen bugs. They had flying insects in the summertime, but they didn't have like ants and beetles and other bugs there. So they were pretty upset when they saw pictures of spiders in a book. And one lady got really excited when a beetle came in with her shipment. And this would be a good time to talk about the glass balls. So that big storm that came in, within a day or two, the storm cleared, and we took the boys out to the beach to have some fun. And from the water to the grass, the black sand, for as far as you could see, glass balls lined, and I'm not talking, feet apart. I'm talking glass balls as far as you could see, from water to grass, glass balls. And the glass balls, or glass floats, some people call them, these are fishing nets. And in the old days, before they had the plastic ones, they made fishing, these are really cool handmade fishing. I'll send this around so you can see. They made these glass balls, and then they put fishing nets on them, and then they hung them on the fishing nets to hold the fishing nets. And that's how they floated. Today they have plastic, so they don't have these anymore. If you get one by the beach, go to California, you'll see that they're perfect. You get an old one if you look at the bottom of it. Now, I didn't know this didn't happen every day because that was our first month there. So we loaded up several boxes, and then I mailed them south to schools to share with pen pal classrooms. They were worth $100 a piece. I didn't know that. So you'll see this one has some rubbing on it that shows you the old net. I was in Cody a couple weeks ago, and I held up one of these glass balls, and there was a sconce on the wall next to me, and when I held it up, I looked up at it, and I about jumped out of my skin. I was so excited. There was water in it. Not very many of them have water in it. The only time there's water is when they are held deep in the ocean or stuck in glacier ice for a long period of time, and then it comes in through imperfections in the glass. This glass ball is different from the two I just sent around because of its color. If you notice some of the color that we have here, this one and this one, these are Mediterranean glass balls. The ones that have color like this that are in their browns and dark greens, those were made in the Mediterranean. Many of these are well over 100 years old. No way of knowing for sure how old. And as opposed to this kind from Japan, Japan did the blue and the clear. And this one, you can see it's been rubbed on the sands so much that it's no longer see-through. And these probably feel very familiar to our Aleutian visitor today. I'm sure you found many of those in your day. In the 18 months that we had left in Nelson Lagoon, we found one more. But our boys bothered us every single day, take us to the beach, because they were sure we were going to see all these glass balls. So one of the things that I do as an author to keep up with my writing is on Thursdays, I post little stories on Alaska bush life on Facebook. And I'm going to move all of those to my melissacook.us webpage. So if you read my book and you want to continue to learn more about Alaska, these stories are not in the book. The last one that I did was about glass balls. And the story behind the glass balls, it was interesting to see what people had to say about them. But if you want to learn more about Alaska beyond my book, visit my webpage. It'll be up there hopefully in the next week or so. We'll get that connected as a blog. But it's also on Alaska Bush Life if you're on Facebook. Okay. This is the the big town of Nelson Lagoon. This is the school. And when that big storm came, it sucked a lot of sand out from under the school. So you get to find out what happens to a school that's built on sand when the sand gets sucked out during a storm. It was exciting. And this was the house that we lived in. Little teacherage house. It had two different apartments in it. I don't think we have an actual picture of that, though. A head-on picture. Okay, go ahead. Oh, go back one. So this mound out here in the yard at this time, this picture was taken in probably 1994. That is not just regular sand dune. That is one of the last Aleut bunk places that they had built. It was a safety room built to protect the Aleut people in that community from the Japanese during World War II. And because they had already invaded one of the other towns further down the coast, they were afraid. So they built these rooms. And then when they went, maybe people don't realize, but the Aleuts were actually taken to Southeast Alaska during the war against their will and forced to live in old mines and old logging camps. And they stayed there for several years, and when they came back to villages destroyed, pets that were no longer there, and they had some of these old protective places that they were going to hide in, but this one got forgotten after those years, and our son found it. And luckily, our other son saw him find it, because the way he found it was, third grader looks down, there's a cool piece of wood there. I think I'll jump on it. And he jumped on it, and through the entrance he went, and the wood popped back, and our other son turned just in time to see his brother disappear and freaked him out. So he came in and told us that he had just disappeared, which made no sense until we found him in the room down below. That's kind of like a kid in a well, right? He had no way out if we hadn't found him, and who would know how to find him if he just didn't show up? Anyway, it's in the book. It's in the book. Okay, so that's what Nelson Lagoon actually looked like when the wing got tipped by George. And the green point there is where I wrote my prologue. I didn't actually write it there, but that's where the experience that I write about takes place. Only this is on a nice day. That wasn't. Oh, yes, and Pavlov, if you look off in the distance, you can see Pavlov volcano, which is 48.2 miles away, which it turns out Vesuvius is 5 miles from Pompeii. I didn't know that at the time. So 48 miles turns out to be a safe distance, at least from Pavlov. Okay, so you can see the Gulf of Alaska in this picture, and you can see Prince of Wales Island. Thorn Bay is right here. We also worked in Craig on this side. So these are the two towns, areas that we lived in. This is 50 miles by 100 miles. And they actually have a couple of shows that are filmed there. One of them is called Port Protection. So if you want to see what it looks like. All right. This is Ketchikan. Anybody ever been to Ketchikan? Okay, so this kind of looks familiar. All right. So you probably flew in on the airstrip here, or you came in by ferry. This is the Ketchikan Narrows. Spent a lot of time in these narrows, either flying in or boating in or out. And then this is town. And if you go up the Ketchikan Narrows, you get out to Clarence Strait. And in Clarence Strait, that is the Inside Passage, which was my last week's blog post on Alaska Bush Life. I have a picture of Prince of Wales Island, and I have half of it is lit and half of it is dark in the picture, and that's showing off a sucker hole. They call it a sucker hole because those people who live in Southeast don't see the sun a lot, and when you look up and you see the sun, you get all excited thinking you're going to have a nice day, but it's just a sucker hole and it closes back up. So it was a perfect picture of a sucker hole because one half of the island is lit up, the other is dark as can be, and the top, I got the top clouds where you could see blue sky above, so it's kind of like a tease because it is there, you just can't see it. And then I got a picture down the Inside Passage of it being dark and gloomy, which is what we lived in. Okay, and then if you come up here, you can see that's right above my hand is the Kasam Bay, and that is where the ferry used to come in and out. It's a 3-hour ride from that point to Ketchikan. And it's rough in the Clarence, so you want to make sure you eat before you get in the Clarence Strait. The Stikine was the first ferry that went into, I think it was around 2000 or 2001, somewhere in there. The Stikine was brought out. The island decided we wanted our own transportation. The Alaska Highway gave us 2 ferries a week. They came on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 2 a.m. Ooh, bad time. And it was the Aurora. So once we got this ferry, they sent the Aurora up north to Prince William Sound, and we got daily service. And then they put on, in 2006, they put in the Prince of Wales. On the Stikine, they took a picture, and they were so proud of their computer center that they had on the Stikine, 6 different computer desks for people that were one after another cubicles. And we had 3 sons, and he was the tech. I was the tech teacher. And so they took a picture of our family with all of our laptops. In the next few years, my husband and I wrote grants and helped the school get computers for every one of the kids, grades 5 through 12. And we helped to implement the very first virtual high school that actually taught the students with live video with a teacher from all the little remote sites that we had. We had 10 little schools that might have 1 or 2 high school students in each one. So they got to go to class online with video. Okay, and this is Thorn Bay. And in Thorn Bay, you fly in and you come in through here, and then you land in the bay. And the bay only freezes like once every few years, and it's only for a day or two because, like I said, it's not as cold there as it is here. And then you could take this road at 6 miles out to the only beach on the island, which is Sandy Beach.
Might point out the water on the right
Is Clarence Strait.
well, it's Clarence Strait, it's part of the Inside Passage, but I think this works. All the cargo for Anchorage, Juneau, and a lot of the Inside Passage towns go up this Inside Passage. You don't have freeways for semis, that sort of thing. So this is how they get all their goods. We would sit out there on the beach and we would watch cargo ship after cargo ship, tugboats really pulling barges. But you also get to see all those big fancy cruise ships that hold 5,000 people. That's where they go, is right through this strait.
Well, and when I was standing on the Sandy Beach area, and further, the road continues, and there's another rocky beach out there. In fact, that's what the picture is taken. I used to stand, and that's why I took this picture. I had some people say, the book cover, I know exactly where that is, because I used to camp out there. That's some of my old students. But I used to go stand out there and wave to the cruise ships. And although in Nelson Lagoon I was lonely, and the island had more people, I was still lonely because there weren't a lot of people. And I would stand on that beach and I would wave to 5,000 people on a boat that would wave back, but I was still as lonely. I was still out there and lonely, but I was waving to them and they waved back, so that helped a little. We had a principal who lived where the Iditarod went through, and he collected these. They used to throw them on the ground because they knew they were valuable to the community, and they would go and collect them. And he came out to Nelson Lagoon and gave us a couple, and I still have them. And they show the paws wearing through, so I'll send those around. Those are the little mitts for the Iditarod dogs. Yeah, and so it's an example of how you can live in the state of Alaska and you can hear about the snow, the ice, the Iditarod, the aurora borealis, and not experience it in 20 years. We experienced it with you on TV, in magazines. That's how we saw the aurora borealis. I see them online now when I go on and post and help people figure out how to get to Alaska. Or if they have questions, want to see pictures or hear stories. But I can't tell them any stories about the aurora borealis, and I can't tell them about the Iditarod any more than you could, because it's a big state. Okay, there's another picture of Nelson Lagoon. Or not Nelson Lagoon, Thorn Bay. This is actually the town of Thorn Bay, and the people who owned airplanes in town kept their planes here, and these are where the fishermen came and parked their boats, and this is where you flew in and out with the commuter planes. They would fly in the water, land, come up to here, and then there was a bench here. So if you read my book, you'll hear me talk about sitting on the bench and looking out. This is where I used to go and sit out. I actually figured out nobody's out there at night, and I had insomnia, so hey, why not walk the dock? And I was talking to somebody in here just a little while ago about being from Burlington, a little small community, and how safe I feel there. Well, I felt the same way here. So I could come out here in the middle of the night, sit on the dock, and not worry. My biggest fear was falling in and nobody was around. So we actually lived over here. This was the town store and the school. Logging community. Okay, and this is the Bering Sea. And this is what it looks like on a nice day. Because it's not unusual for a regular day to be 40 to 60 mile an hour winds, and that's what it does to the water. But I'm going to read my prologue, but I'm probably going to have to read it over there because I can't read it and hold this. So let me get a book. Excuse me. Yes.
All around the world.
They're well over 100 years old. They've been floating around in the water, and I read online when I put my post up that the balls, they float around the world. They are very common in the Aleutians, though, and it isn't that uncommon to have the shore get covered in balls. It's just that we never saw it again, and so if you live there for 20 years, you probably see it several times. We just live there, too. Okay. Okay, can you hear me? All right. My prologue is short, but it talks about how I felt 18 months into my teaching assignment in Nelson Lagoon. Alone on a beach. I'm alone on a beach in Alaska. I have been isolated here for 18 months and might as well be on another planet. It is wintertime and a storm is blowing mist off the Bering Sea waves as they crash onto the black sand at my feet. I cradle my frozen self and stare out across the endless whitecaps of the angry sea. My coat is soaked, but I don't care. I know people are out there, I remind myself, for all the good they will do me here. Memories from my childhood in Detroit surface, and I leave the sandy spit for the busy city streets, if only in my imagination. I remember the hustle of people along the city sidewalks and the conversations heard as people pass by, hurrying to their destinations. I picture myself standing on a busy street corner with the smell of fresh, wet pavement and the sound of water splashing under the tires. A sprinkle of spring rain touches my face, and then I am pulled back to my reality. Thick Alaska raindrops painfully pelt my tender skin as the wind picks up. Cold rain runs down my bright red cheeks, and the sting shifts to a freezing numbness. My tongue licks the ocean's salty mist from my lips. A rusty blue Suburban sits on a dune in the distance, looking over the sea from a primitive road. My family awaits my return, watching the storm's action from the warmth of the old-school vehicle. No one else ventured out today. Come out of the storm! The raging waves and wind drowned out my husband's voice. He is becoming impatient and worried as I stand in the furious storm. He hollers to me, "You're soaked, let's go!" I steal another moment of solitude. Efforts to transplant myself back to Detroit fail. I face the turbulent sea before me. Not a soul is in sight. I feel so alone in this spit. How did I end up here, of all places? I feel stuck, helpless to change my circumstances. The tiny Aleut village of 30 winter residents is a mile down the black sand road. I seldom see any of them. Only 9 school-aged children cross my path daily, and even then they have little to say. The creak of the rusty Suburban door is lost in the furious storm. My husband's voice radiates across the beach as he steps out into the storm. Come on! He's worried about me. Am I losing my grip as he did last winter? He recognizes the signs of cabin fever. As I turn my back to the sea, the wind presses my red coat against my body. Rain peppers my backsides, drenching my remaining dry spots as I work my way back down the beach and climb the hill to my waiting family. They are all I have out here. We spend every waking hour together, and yet my loneliness reaches to the depths of my soul at times. When you live in a city like Detroit, it's hard to believe there's a place like this. When you live in a place like this, it's hard to believe there's a city like Detroit. Written in 1996. Oh, thank you. So I'm going to take some questions, but before I do, I want to tell you that my book, The Call of the Last Frontier, is endorsed by Ann Parker, who also wrote the book Follow Me to Alaska. Her story is about a woman who leaves the big city of El Paso and moves to a very remote area of Alaska. And it's her story of getting used to that lifestyle. On the back of the book, Aaron Linsdell from Jackson Hole was the first man from America to solo to the South Pole, and it took him 90 days. So he has the book Antarctic Tears. He's also on YouTube, and he has an adventurous soul. He is an American adventurer. He wrote in his endorsement, "This book helped me live adventures I'll never have but desperately want." And the final endorsement I have on my book is from Larry Knut. He wrote, and if any of you have ever heard of him, he wrote the Alaska Bear Tales series, 17 Alaska books. He sold millions in the 1980s and 90s. I sent him a letter a year before my book came out because I looked at my bookshelf to see, who should I send to see if they would endorse my book? And Larry had so many books on my shelf, I couldn't help but write to him. We are friends today, but we weren't friends then. He got my letter a year later and called. My book was 2 weeks from going to press. He read it, gave me an endorsement, and his endorsement says, "A well-written and accurate description of the raw edge of Alaska, out there in the bush, where few city essentials exist and there is no reprieve. A phenomenal read with a goosebump ending. Larry Knut. I get goosebumps when I read it, and I think Larry Knut, because when I lived in the Aleutians and I was lonely and it was cold, I was sitting beside that window in my house with a blanket reading Larry's books. 26 years ago, I was reading his books, and his name's on mine, so it's pretty cool. Anyway, my book comes in a paperback, an ebook on Amazon, and large print and hardcover, and I am currently recording an audio version in my closet at home. So, do you want to play the slideshow of the drone footage that our son took while he was in Alaska? I gave him a ticket to go home and a memory card and said, go get me some footage and then go visit your friends too. So he went, and this is what he got. And you can watch that while I take questions. Does anyone have a question for me? Yes. Okay.
I took a cruise to Alaska, and we ended up in Fairbanks, Alaska. And we were in the hotel, and my husband and I were going up in the elevator, and there was an employee in there, and he says, where are you folks from? And we said, we're from Montana. He goes, oh my gosh, you guys live there year round? And I said, wait a minute, you live in Fairbanks, Alaska, and you think we shouldn't live in Montana? I just thought that was hysterical. But after you said the weather, yeah, I can see why they, thought maybe we were worse off than they were.
Yeah, but Fairbanks, I have an acquaintance that lives in Fairbanks, and he said, I watch him every day. I know him, but I also watch him on YouTube, and he talks about 35, 55 below, and we don't get that even here, very rarely. So Fairbanks has ice fog that causes car accidents because you can't see through the ice floating in the air. It was at the top of our list of places to go, though. So it's on my bucket list. I'm going to get to Fairbanks in the fall and see those aurora borealis yet, but I'll do it as a tourist. Do I have any other questions? Some of the questions we've had in the past were, why did we go to Alaska? And we went for the retirement. We stayed for the retirement. We did leave for a year. So if you look at our years, 1995 to 2016, that's not quite 20, that's 21. That's because we spent a year in Ohio teaching Alaska teachers technology. At a time when technology, people did not know the difference between a file and a folder. So that was a long time ago. You put the file in the folder. Oh, that period of technology. Yes?
So you said you had have three children. What did you do regarding medical care?
That's a good question. We didn't have it. Yeah. So we had a son who had a severe asthma attack, and they life-flighted him. Same son had ITP, which is a blood disorder, and he came home from a camping trip in 4th grade covered in bruises, and then they sequestered him from us to find out if we had beaten him black and blue. And once they realized that we hadn't, they put him on the first flight out of town into Ketchikan. So we went to Ketchikan, but I have a chapter in my book called Death Knocks Too Soon. And it's partly because there's not really good medical care there. But I will tell you that the doctors that we had that were there was usually a doctor. There was a doctor for the Native people at the Native clinic and a doctor for the white people at the city clinic. And sometimes the Natives clinic would let you come in the later years because they then became competition, but early on they didn't. So we had 2 doctors on the island at any given time usually, and they were the best. Because they wore multiple hats. They didn't have you go to the specialist down the street. They couldn't just refer you. If they referred you, they were giving you a $1,000 bill to go to Ketchikan alone if you could do it in a day, and multiple $1,000s to go to Seattle or Anchorage. So they had to try and help you no matter what. So we had some of the best, just not close by. So if you have an emergency, yeah. That's why we had deaths knocks too soon. Yes. Okay.
The area you say you feel alone, you look at that. I remember going to NYU in New York.
Mm-hmm.
That city is boiling with people, and yet it's the highest place of suicide. You feel alone.
Yes.
In the area. And when in the Aleutians, I remember us as a group and way up all of Alaska, we're trying to get the teachers and the people together.
Mm-hmm.
The teachers that come in to work together because the student is the one that is the important. And so there was always a division.
Mm-hmm.
There was a thing called the non-natives on the hill.
Mm-hmm.
That was the teachers.
Right.
Because they didn't come down to do the traditional stuff. There was tradition language being taught.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's getting better now because we're getting more teachers who
Right.
are of our own people, and a lot of us are mixed. We are Russian, we are Swede,
Mhm.
we are, and so the languages that we spoke, like you say about the volcanoes, we are called
Right.
volcano people.
Right.
We are a fierce tribe
Right.
because of being able to live in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
And but very much survivors. We are one of the best known areas of threading the highways of the ocean
Mm-hmm.
because we know how to get into the areas of shallow water. You say you have 2 o'clock the best time to leave.
Right.
That the ocean dictates when you leave
Yes.
because it's when the ocean, when the sea is high.
Right.
It's very much like the farmers. That's why I have the highest respect for farmers. We are farmers of the ocean, the sea. And I see the farmers of the land here. And that's hard life,
Yes.
And the area of death and getting help.
Mm-hmm.
We had traditional people that knew how to take care of it. And the white and the native doctors, that was prejudice happening.
Yes.
And and I pray that you do say that when you give your talks, that during that time, there was 90s, was prejudice
Yes.
still very
Yes.
much
I do
exists.
talk about it in my book.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So,
We called it the Fishbowl. Felt like a fishbowl. I felt alone in a town that was very kind to me. The Aleut people are known to be one of the kindest tribes, and they were. But I wasn't part of their culture. They didn't invite me beyond a birthday party. And then when we got to the island, they wouldn't let me have medical care or prescriptions because of the color of my skin. That's not true anymore, and that might be why those barriers are breaking down, because it's no longer native only, white only, or native and white, but native only. When they take that down, then you don't feel that resentment that you're sick and you can't see a doctor. Yes.
it is from the white
Right.
people that are telling them not to service you
Yes.
unless under dire circumstances.
Right.
And now the corporations are now taking over, and they are saying, no, it's open to everyone.
Right.
And the cruise ships are coming in,
Mm-hmm.
and they're seeing all this going back and forth, but it's falling back to our people.
To locals.
Everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I do talk about that.
Yeah.
I talk about my son not being able to get dental care when everybody else in the community got it but him. And he had a cavity. Yes.
I just have a comment. Her middle name, that's my granddaughter. Her name is Kinley.
Uh-huh.
She was born in Alaska. This is my daughter, and she had her.
Mhm.
And when she was in labor, we're all there, and the doctors are there, and my husband's there, and her husband's there. Everyone's there, and there's a moose in there. And we all ran, and we left her. And she goes, "Hey, you guys!" Hey, all over a moose. And we had the doctors left. Everybody left her, and she's in labor to go see a moose.
Right.
Which they
We
were
have our
everywhere.
priorities,
Right,
right?
because
And I was like,
We
yeah.
have our priorities.
I was
Yeah.
like, what the heck? There's a moose that lives in our front yard. I kept thinking there's a baby in the hospital.
I will tell you this.
Back.
Yeah.
In Alaska, they have what's called the Alaska Way. And in a description of the Alaska Way, and this might get back to what you were talking about being today, I saw a lady in a clinic calling it, and she was probably in her mid-80s, calling for a taxi cab. And I was walking by, and I had some free time. This is Tucson, mind you. I stop and I say, "Hey, would you like a ride? I can give you a ride." So she hangs up, and she looks at me shocked, and she said, "What did you say?" I said, "Well, I can give you a ride home if you want to ride home." And so she said, okay. And so she came down, and I didn't want her to have to walk out to the parking lot. So I went out, had my mom in the car who had gray hair. So I came and I pulled around, and she sees my mom sitting in the front seat. My mom laughs because I picked somebody up. But she gets in and she said, are you just picking up old ladies? And I said, no, it's the Alaska way. You help your neighbor in Alaska. That is just what you do because that's all you have there. And it doesn't matter if you like them or you don't. You help them in their time of need, and they will help you in your time of need because that's what they do. Native or white, it didn't matter. People helped. When my son fell in that hole, the community came out. We got him out by the time they got there, and then told us the elder from the community knew what it was. Even the young people didn't know. So it was a history lesson for all of us. Do I have any more questions? Good question. We lived in Nelson Lagoon. We barged our supplies in once in May, and they arrived during the summertime and were unloaded and put in our house. And then we lived in the Tongass National Forest. We bought a cargo trailer, 5x8, and every time we went home, we loaded it up, the truck and the cargo trailer, brought back a year's supply of as many, close to a year's supply as we could, of food for our family because it's so expensive. Couldn't get the perishables, but we brought all the canned food we could. And then, teaching supplies, schools, next size up for clothes, everything. And then as we got closer to the years that we were going to leave, then on the way home, we filled the trailer and the truck with stuff we wanted to take home. And we brought them home for several years and put them on our property and then in our shop till we built a house. Then we realized we didn't really want that stuff anyway, and it went to the donation, but yeah. Okay, anybody else? I am so, oh, yes.
What is the biggest surprise you ever got while you were teaching down there?
The biggest surprise I ever got while I was teaching. Well, I had some students who wanted to give a speech. It was their how-to speech in high school. And they brought in their traps. And they showed us how to work them. And then I went to lunch and I told my husband, I said, hey, Nate and, I can't remember his other name, but Nate the pilot, he brought in his traps to show us how he catches beaver. And my husband about fell off his chair. He says, you didn't let them play with those in there, did you? What are you doing with traps in your classroom? Don't you realize somebody could have lost an arm? No, I didn't know. That was a pretty big surprise. I didn't know anything about traps until then. Don't let the kids play with traps in your classroom. Yeah. And new people, we got used to it pretty quick, but if you're in Thorn Bay, it is not unusual to see a 12 or 13-year-old boy walking down the street or riding his bike with his gun going out to hunt. That is a normal thing to see. Not in Detroit, but in Thorn Bay. Yes. Great questions. Anybody else? We were. We were the only teachers teaching K through 12, and we were the only teachers that the kids told us ever happened where we actually switched classrooms because you can go crazy teaching the same kids all day. So you have 3 kids in your class. So we switched. So he taught high school 2 hours a day. I taught the rest of the classes, the 2 hours. And then we switched, and 1 hour a day I taught the entire school. We did PE. Yes, that was PE. Or art or something like that, so he could do his administrative duties. You get really creative and organized.
How big were your classes?
I had my classrooms. Classrooms was probably the size of 1.5 normal classrooms, and we had a partition through the middle. Oh, number of students. I had 3 one year and 4 another in the Aleutians. We had 12 total, so he had the rest. And then in Thorn Bay, I had classes up into the 20s the first couple years, but then the Tongass National Forest closed to logging, and I got down to as few as 1 for 1 hour a day. But I think the principal was being nice to me because I have MS, and he was trying to keep me going. So he gave me almost like a prep period. But it's a little harder to teach just 1 than it is to teach a whole class, because then it's just one-on-one, and there's no prep time. It's conversation.
Let me point out here as well, even when we were in Thorn Bay, the schools were larger. The average size was probably 14 kids, but that's probably 14 kids in 3 grade levels.
Right.
So it isn't like you get to teach just 3rd grade or 5th grade. You're teaching 3rd, 4th, and 5th.
I never.
I actually taught in a normal situation where I had 30 kids in one grade level. That was a dream. 14 kids in 3 grade levels, that's a lot of work.
Yeah, the hardest assignment I ever had, 19 students, grades 4 through 8, and the majority of them had IEPs. 3 of them were for advanced children. 1 of them was almost beyond high school. And then several of them were very, very low. So even though I only had the grade span of 4 through 8, I had almost the K-12 with 19 kids in it. It was very tough.
It's like country schools.
Yes, yes.
What is the retention level of education, like going into college and stuff?
So when we first got to Thorn Bay, the Aleutians, none of the kids went to college. But we only graduated 1 a year. So it's not like we had a lot, and they didn't want to leave their community. It was very uncomfortable to leave their little village. And they didn't. One of them is still there that graduated while we were there. In Thorn Bay, our first years, we sent a number of kids to college. Very few graduated. Then we went through a period of time where we didn't send anybody. And then we went back to a lot of kids went to school and did graduate. And it just had to do with who was there at the time. We got influxes of different kinds of people. When I say that the teachers turned over every year or 2, 5 tops, so did everybody else. In fact, they weren't bound to contracts. So they didn't necessarily stay a year. To have kids come and go in the middle of the school year was very common. Yeah. Very transient population. You always, every day that I was out of my house, I saw somebody in my little town of 300 people that I did not know. Every day. Every time I went out. Who's that? Our oldest son kept his clock on Wyoming time and cried when we crossed the Yukon-Alaska, the state line into Alaska, and never changed his clock from Wyoming until he came back. We got there in 1995. He came home in 2006. Our middle son and our younger son built a house on their own, cutting down trees, making the boards from the trees that they cut. They volunteered at the local family mill and got their wonky boards, and they built 2 1,000 square feet homes, one on top of the other, with a catch system. They survived on one power cord, and when I moved my son and his family with a newborn, well, I guess he was 2 at that point, 2 years old and a 7-year-old, they did not even have the cap on the roof yet. It was 55 degrees. They didn't get heat for several months, and it rained inside their house. Hardy. And yes, his wife left him after several years. They moved back down here, but they'd had enough, so by then the damage was done. It's a rough life. It is a rough life. And she was from Orland, so she wasn't used to it. And the truth be known, he wasn't either, because he got to live in teacher housing as a kid. And that's our 2 sons. Our middle son, who's there, who built that house, is still there living in it and as happy as can be in that house. He loves that lifestyle. Our youngest son lives in Burlington near us because he wanted to raise his kids by grandparents. Our other son had the other grandparents a mile down the road. So I like having my grandkids close by. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. There are books for sale in the back. You can get one from me or from Elgin. I'm glad to sign it to you or sign a book that you've already bought. And thank you again. Appreciate it.